Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and later on our podcast channel. Please remember to like and subscribe to whichever platform you are listening or watching through. I'm Andrew Musgrove, and joining us today is one of our NUFC writers, Kieran Kelly, and we're going to reveal the results to the Big Bruce survey, which we ran a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, it's not been the best start to the season, and we wanted to get your opinion on what you thought of the situation at Newcastle United with Steve Bruce, the transfer window, Mike Ashley, and nearly 10,000 of you came and voted and shared your thoughts on the club, and we're going to talk through those results today. So let me just count up, I think there's about 16 questions or so, and we're going to talk through them. Nearly 7,000 on each question voted, so lots to get through. A big sample size, which I think is always good, Kieran, because it's always good to have a few thousand sharing their views, even though it is rather a gloomy outlook. So we'll get on to the first question. If anyone's got any questions themselves to the results that we're about to unveil, please pop it in the comments and we'll get through the best of them. We'll start in order with number one, Kieran, and it is, do you agree on the negativity? Do you agree that the Chronicle are to blame for the fans' negativity? So this obviously goes back to what Steve Bruce said after the Manchester United game. When our colleague asked, did he go on holiday? That's what the fans wanted to know. Steve Bruce didn't like that. I think, we don't really need to be minded about what he said, but the question was, do you agree? And we have 7,204 people responded to this, with 65% saying no and 15% saying yes, which I guess just shows how wide of the mark Steve Bruce was. We don't really want to dwell on this one because it's kind of been dealt with, but he was wide of the mark with what he said, and I think this probably just re-emphasizes the feeling amongst the fan base.
Yeah, in some ways, I'm almost surprised it's only 85%. No, I think I'd imagine in the days after that he would have regretted what he said. I mean, as we've written about, as we've said before, to think the fans, Newcastle fans are incredibly intelligent. They don't need the press. It isn't 1937. You're not governed by what the press say. I think to say otherwise is a bit insulting to them. I think he will have certainly realised that in the days after. He's coming to that press conference. Obviously, the adrenaline's still going. They've lost, and he's heard the chants. It was a large section of the away end that day at Old Trafford, and I think he was telling me the press conference was only a couple of minutes long. He wanted it over with, and in contrast, a week later when he did the pre-match press conference for the Leeds game, he was much calmer, and I think he'd had time to think of how everything had gone on after that. And as I said, to think that fans can't make up their own minds, they're going to the games, they're watching on. I just think, as we've said before, stadiums are no longer a safe haven, really. I think it was very naive of certain figures within the club last season, maybe to think that it's just an online minority who are so vocal, and that isn't the case, as we saw at the Leeds game, and it's going to be there in the background probably throughout this season. Steve Bruce, I think, is smart enough to know that it's going to come down to results. You saw that the Leeds game. What encouraged me was, yes, there were the chants there, but they were with the team throughout, and you wouldn't expect anything less from Newcastle fans, really. That when the chants did pop up around the other areas of the ground, there would be other chants of encouraging the team, and I think that'll continue. But it's going to be there in the background. I think Steve Bruce is only ever 1 or 2 defeats away from the spotlight again. So in a way, he has to go on a run, probably similar to the end of last season. The team need to push up the table again, because it's just not going to go away for me. And I think we see with the survey, with the answers to come, how entrenched the views are, really.
I mean, and he's got to start this weekend, and the next 2 games are really crucial against sides around Newcastle in the table. They need to, you would say, at least pick 4. You don't want to lose one of these games, do you, against Watford and Wolves? Bare minimum, you would say 4 points. You would like to think 6 points, but can you see Newcastle starting that momentum that you're talking about then, and at least coming away unbeaten from the next two games?
Really, that probably says out. No, I think what's the frustration for me, years gone by, they've had tougher starts. Yes, they play Manchester United in the first few games. Yes, no game is easy in the Premier League, but I think if they weren't to pick up points in these two, having only picked up 2 points against Southampton and Leeds at home, you're wondering where the wins are coming from. Because you look down the line, you look at the teams that are coming before Christmas, that December looks particularly tough. They really need to start picking up points because it's still so early in the season. There have been times, of course, in years gone by where they haven't had many points and it's come together, but you don't want to be going into that Christmas period. Certainly not with only a handful of points, let alone the bottom three. I know it's really early days, but given everything, that pressure building and the atmosphere, that it'd be brilliant if they could get 6 points from these two, even 4. It's not bad. They just need that first win. It'd be amazing what that could do for them, because you look down the lines. I was saying, Callum Wilson will be back soon. Martin Dubravka, John Joe Shelby has his critics, but if they're to keep playing with a back three, which I know is up for debate, he's really important in it. Not a coincidence they haven't been keeping the ball very well with him out of this team. So there are little shoots, if they can get that win, that would make you think, okay, it's going to be a slog. It's ridiculous that we already know it's going to be a slog, but they just need that first win, don't they?
We'll have our preview podcast looking ahead to that Watford game later today with Gibbo, so look out for that one. On to question 2 then, Kieran. I do appreciate for those watching, the results are a little bit small on the screen, but I'm going to read them out, so hopefully you can follow. And the full results will be online after this broadcast as well, so I'll point you into the direction of that at the end of the show. Question 2, who is to blame for Newcastle's fans' negativity? And right at the top here was Mike Ashley on 57%. Second was the playing style with 22%. And Steve Bruce only got 1%. The media actually got more than Steve Bruce. I suppose you could say playing style is Steve Bruce. So some would argue, well, isn't that 23%? But this is the way that the responses were split. Mike Ashley right at the top. And I guess, Kieran, that is the fact that in many ways, Steve Bruce is collateral to Mike Ashley's ambition and direction for this club, just as managers who have gone before him had been, and probably managers to come after him will be as well, if Mike Ashley's still in charge, because there is no desire from Mike Ashley to turn this club into a top 6 side. It seems to be just to survive, mid-tail maybe at best. Hope a cup run comes along, but there's nothing to get people excited. And I guess looking at the results here, that's what people have really, come out with.
Yeah, I think no one's lost sight of what the ultimate problem is at the club until Mike Ashley finally sells up. Nothing's really going to change. Yes, I know you can point to certain people come in, it would be different, but it's always going to come back to the same problem. You saw that in the summer transfer window with Steve Bruce had obviously done probably more than other managers. He got more out of Mike Ashley than some other managers in the past. You think of how the policy changed last summer to sign experienced players. You think of how they paid Joe Willock's transfer fee in installments last summer. I mean, these shouldn't be big things for Premier League clubs, but for Newcastle, that they were significant. But equally, when it came to getting 2 loan signings, Bruce has kind of hit that wall that managers inevitably hit under Mike Ashley. And I think for me, it's I wouldn't say it's encouraging, but it doesn't surprise me, because I think Mike Ashley, there's been a PR campaign almost in the past year whereby he is fighting tooth and nail for the takeover still. He's, every club statement, bar 1 or 2, is about taking pot shots at the Premier League. Newcastle fans are intelligent to see through that, when the club have talked about wanting transparency from the Premier League. We haven't really seen that from the club in other areas, and that is the biggest problem is Mike Ashley. And it is sobering to think that until that changes, Newcastle are going to be where they are, aren't they? And that is the frustration, and that's been the frustration for many years now.
On to question 3, and this is what Steve Bruce should do. Now, given that Steve Bruce only got about 1%, I mean, you just saw there all the responses to question 2, so you could add the different Steve Bruce responses in it. It would probably take it up to about 3 or 4%, but, he was quite at the bottom of the chain. He was certainly nowhere near the 57% that Mike Ashley and Lee Charnley got. This, though, doesn't look too good. What should Steve Bruce do? 7,217 people responded, and 78% said he should resign. 22% said he should stay and try and get the results. He's got a tough job to turn this around, hasn't he? Even if he gets a couple of wins, over the next 2 games, it's still going to be hard to turn around the majority of the fan base, I think. And I think over long term as well, because he might pick up a few results as he did towards the end of last season. But as you said earlier in the show, Kieran, he is literally only a couple of bad results away from everything turning around again. So that can't be good for him. That's not good for the club. It's not good for the players. It's not good for anybody if that is the reaction and the relationship he has with the fans, where he is on this kind of seesaw. He's got this balancing act, which, let's be honest, who can really win that?
Yeah, it's he's had some testing times, I think, as a manager. The anniversary of the Halloween defeat, the Derby defeat, is coming up next month, isn't it? But I think this is it's been his biggest test. To, as you said, to only be 1 or 2 defeats away, even after a run, it'll just crop up again, and I think that's going to be the narrative throughout the season, really. I can't see him walking away. It's not going to happen, in my opinion. And it's how I don't think the fans are going to change just because of that. I think the fans know he won't want to walk away either. But if the team aren't performing, they're going to make their feelings clear. And I think Bruce recognises that, to be fair, that they have every right to do that. And it's just this strange kind of atmosphere as a result, where I think you'll have the chance going on throughout games this season, and Newcastle have to find results still, and I can't see him walking away. As I said, I just think he feels a duty towards his staff, towards the players. Admittedly, he did say, I think, at his press conference last week, that if it did start to affect the players, he would consider it. And are we at that stage yet? I think the players didn't crumble against Leeds. That first 20 minutes was really poor, but they did respond. I don't think there's any doubt that the players are still playing for him. And as long as Bruce has that, I think he'll keep going. He'll keep feeling that he can turn it around, and whether fans agree with him or not, he still feels he can do that. So. I can't see him resigning, no.
Question number 4, and it was whether Newcastle will be relegated if Steve Bruce remains in charge for the majority of the season. And 80% said yes, 20% said no, and that was from a sample size of just under 7,200 people who got back to us. There is a fear, Kieran, I think, from fans that relegation is a very real possibility. We saw last season they went on that horrendous run, and if that had been a few weeks, towards the end of the season, it would have potentially been a lot worse for Newcastle. I know they turned it around in the end, but there is this fear that they are in trouble this season, especially if Callum Wilson picks up another injury. We know he's out at the moment. Hopefully, it'll not be too long until he's back, but. He picked up a couple of injuries last season. There's that fear. Can Alan St-Maximin maintain this great start of the season that he's had? Does he get injured? Does he, his form drop? Because at the moment, Kevin, even with Callum Wilson in the squad, the plan seems to be, this is just my opinion, but the plan seems to be give it to St-Maximin and hope he can do something with it. And you're relying on him. Do you share that fear that relegation is a real possibility?
Oh, I think this season is a survival battle, and it's sobering to say that, 5 or 6 games in, that I do see Newcastle being in among the 6-7 teams. I think the there was a chance really to build on that momentum that they generated at the end of last season. It was one of the best runs of form then in the Premier League under Mike Ashley, 17 points from 27. And that momentum really went up in smoke. They didn't actually strengthen the squad. For me, I still can't understand why you can't bring in 2 players on loan. I know there wasn't much interest in their fringe players, but, the idea that you can't bring in these guys who would have freshened things up, who would have pushed the players currently there, I found staggering. I think it was brilliant getting Joe Willock back. They did well to get him permanently. That was a really important message, but you got to build on that. These are loan deals. It's not like fans are wanting 2 more £15 million signings, and the club put out that statement, as we'll talk about later, to explain why. But for me, that coupled with the poor start to the season, any sense of kind of building on last season just gone now for me. And the idea that they could finish above 12th, I find hard as well. I do share the fans' concerns that they're going to be down there one way or the other, and it's ultimately whether that experience that they have. You look at people like Matt Ritchie, John Joe Shelby, Paul Dummett, who've been in these situations, who can stay calm. You're seeing the players talking about sticking together already. It's sobering saying this, as I said, 5-6 games in, but I think that coupled with the quality they have in Wilson, so Maxwell, keep them fit, I think they will be okay. But it's to know already that it's just going to be a struggle, and that's the most frustrating thing. That I think there are a lot of clubs. There probably isn't another club, bar maybe Norwich, who are feeling that right now. But for me, what's concerning is last season Fulham had that little flicker and then they fell away. Whereas this season, I think they're going to be much better teams down there. I think the promoted teams that came up are better. Brentford certainly. I think Watford will, be a really interesting game on Saturday. But I think Watford, they won't be caught adrift certainly come April, in my opinion. I think they'll be in and around it as well. So they're going to have to probably, match, if not even better, last season points total, potentially. But you're looking at it, even if they get a point per game between now and the end of the season, that still feels like a big ask because they've only picked up 2 so far. So yeah, it's hard to feel anything other than pessimistic when you're looking ahead, really.
And I guess that kind of increases the discontent. It increases the anger and the apathy, really, for fans, because when you look at Newcastle United, at best, it looks like survival is what Newcastle United can achieve. Then you do, as a fan, you do look at it and think, well, why should I pay my money and go to the game? Why should I get excited? Because fans want to be excited. They want to believe there's something more than just surviving. And I think when there's not, that just increases, like I said, the anger and the discontent towards Steve Bruce, towards Mike Ashley. But as we'll see, not on the next slide, but the slide after that, there is a realism about what Newcastle United can achieve this season, and that is where they can finish. I'll get those results up in just a moment. The next slide is about changing manager and what Newcastle United could achieve if they change manager. So the question, will Newcastle be relegated if they make a managerial change before Christmas? 72% said yes. 1,994 people said no. Again, it shows the job Steve Bruce has to turn this around. There's a big portion of the fan base who've already made up their mind. That Steve Bruce is not the right man for Newcastle United.
Yeah, and I mean, I think if you took that poll, possibly even in other seasons, you might have got a similar result as well. It's just the results have obviously been pretty poor as well, and I think we've not really seen Mike Ashley in recent years any change manager for Christmas. He's a particular liking for Steve Bruce. I think he, in some ways, I think even if these results continue, he'll let it run to really where a decision needs to be made. I think we saw last season, 2 wins in 21, I think it was, and any other owner in the Premier League probably would have taken action then. And Newcastle were very different. They stuck with Bruce. They felt that decision was vindicated by how they finished the season. But it's just can this team produce another run like that? Can they summon that kind of spirit again under Steve Bruce. As I said, I think the players are still very much playing for him. You saw against Leeds how they kept going, but he realizes very much that it's going to be results that decide this. And if they're to go on another, if they haven't got that win come the end of Wolves, where is it coming from? That is the massive and I think very understandable concern for fans, because I think for too often Newcastle are going into games, against the so-called traditional top six, and maybe it's seen as a bonus if they get anything. But they proved end of last season, they can pick up points against these teams. They can give them a good game. But if you're looking at anything like that as a bonus, then you have to, do your meat and drink against those teams in and around you. And that's what's going to decide this season for me. And so far, 2 points from everything that was on offer, it's not good enough, really. And if that continues, they're in deep trouble, aren't they? So they really need to turn it around sooner rather than later.
We've got a question from Roger, and he asks, Kieran, do you think Newcastle have enough to beat Watford this weekend?
I think it's a battle of two stars for me. You got Sarr at Watford and Saint-Maximin at Newcastle. I think they are two game changers at this level, and whoever turns up on Saturday, I genuinely feel could decide the game. I look at Watford, they've got decent bit of confidence about them. They've just beaten Norwich. They started the season with a brilliant open day win against Villa. It's the crowd will get on top of Newcastle. Not always relish playing a Vicar draw. The ingredients are there one way or the other. I think this could be a game where they get that win. I think they do have the quality to beat Watford. If you can't beat a newly promoted side when you've been back in the Premier League a few years now, what's the point? You have to go into that game looking to win. And I think if they were to lose, it's a mortal blow, really, because you don't want to be suffering defeat like that. It will knock the confidence again. They will have taken a lot from that Leeds game. I know the defending was abhorrent at times, but I think you saw in that second half that after that change to back four with Saint-Maximin, they have enough to beat those teams in and around them. But as you said earlier, it does feel like it's Saint-Maximin or bust at the moment. If you can't expect him every game to be the difference maker, but we are seeing him have that bit of end product. And I think on a game like that, he really has to relish him. He has to produce something, really.
100%. On to question 6, and this was the slide I was talking about where Newcastle can finish this season. So the question was, where is the squad capable of finishing if they fulfill their potential? And a massive, let me just zoom in there, 57% said bottom half, but safe. So, I mean, that is a realistic, aim I think that Newcastle United fans have. They know they can't achieve, top 8 with this side. I mean, the next biggest percentage there is the top 10. And then you can see it gradually gets smaller because Newcastle United fans, I feel, are realistic. They often get hit with this bat that they have too high expectations, and they need to be kind of grateful for just being in the Premier League, which I think is very unfair because at the end of the day, they just want to see their club doing well. But this response, Kieran, shows that they've got a realistic outlook on what their club can achieve with this squad, even if the squad is at its best.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think you saw with expectations, when various fans were interviewed before the Leeds game. I thought it was really well done, just what you'd expect pundits and journalists to do in Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher actually going down and speaking to 5 really eloquent and intelligent supporters who, were so honest about their situation. And you actually saw that reflected in the coverage thereafter. Gary Neville, I think, has sometimes been a bit flippant, a bit, Steve Bruce doing his best job. What do they kind of want a little bit? And he really, you could see what he got from speaking to those fans who just didn't have hope. And that idea of you going to a new season without hope, that you can't even potentially push for the top 10. I think as you see in that survey, there's still a decent few who feel the squad capable of a top 10, but they're very, very realistic to the point where, if they can just be safe in the bottom half, that's what they feel. And I think that is a fair comment. I do think there's enough in that squad to achieve 14th to 13th, even 12 again. You never know. But to finish above that, I think it seems like a push at the moment. But you look at across, I think anyone who looks at Newcastle, when you compare them to even Leeds, on paper, Leeds have some great quality, but if you're to compare the two squads in certain areas, are they, light years ahead of Newcastle? No. I think there is enough there to achieve a comfortable bottom half finish as a minimum. Really, again, it's frustrating because you want to see Newcastle try and push towards that top 10, that they're not already dragged into a relegation dogfight, but it's Mike Ashley's Newcastle.
Well, it's funny. That's like we almost planned the next slide because it is what is the biggest issue at the club now. And Mike Ashley, right there at the top, 39% of people from a sample size of 7,220. So not really surprising that. And I guess the second highest is Summer Recruitment, 22%, which you could easily just put into that category of Mike Ashley as well, which would take him up to what was that, well over 60%. Because he then is responsible for the summer recruitment. He is the man who signs the checks and allows Newcastle United to go out and buy players. He's the man who would have signed off, I would imagine, Joe Willock's deal and moving the structure of it and allowing him to come in permanently. Interestingly, Steve Bruce all the way down. I mean, I've added up the responses to Steve Bruce, and only 73 people said Bruce. You can see there on the screen in various different ways. They said Steve Bruce. I'm not really sure how they count as different ways because they've spelt his name right, so I don't know what's going on there. But anyway, it totals up to about 73 people, which would give you probably about 2%, if most, out of that sample size of 72. 7,220 people. So no surprise, Kieran, I guess, Mike Ashley at the top, because at the end of the day, as we've already said, he's the man who, he could wake up tomorrow and decide, you know what, I do want to make Newcastle a top 6 side. We know that's not going to happen, but then he's the man with the power. So it's no surprise that he's the man at the top of this list who is getting the biggest portion of blame.
No, and as I said, the fans haven't lost sight of that for all his efforts to, I don't think you can doubt he wants to sell the club, and he'd agreed to sell the club, and fair play, give him a round of applause for that. But he still has a duty as a custodian of the club to protect it. And we've said this for years now, but there is a very real danger that the club could go down, the value plummets, massive wage bill, they have to sell loads of assets. It's a gamble he takes regularly. It was a gamble to keep Steve Bruce last April. It paid off. He would have been chuffed with himself for doing that. It's a gamble to only bring in Joe Willock this summer. You look at the teams in and around Newcastle that made 4, 5, 6 signings. They're doing what they can to give it the season the best shot. I don't feel Newcastle have done all they can to give it the best shot, and that's because of who's above the name above the door. And it's the frustration. It's just as frustrating as it was a few years ago. You think of when they finished 5th under Alan Pardew. That summer, their main signing was Vernon Anita. No disrespect to him, but they needed a few signings to build on that. They didn't. They couldn't cope. The squad couldn't cope with playing in the Europa League the year after, and they very nearly went down at one point, didn't they? It's a very different situation, I know, but you finished 12th. It was a reasonable place to finish up in. There was grounds there. Bruce wanted 3 or 4 signings originally. There was grounds there to build on that, to think, why not go for the top 10 finally, actually go for it. There was a lot of talk last season about doing that, but it wasn't long to where it's like remit and staying up, and it's just more of the same. And it's just the frustration, isn't it, that they're going into a game against Watford where it already feels massive. And what date are we today? September 23rd, is it? So, what more can you say, really?
Style of play has come up quite a lot in this survey. People have got an issue with it. Again, it's 14% here. I mean, you have watched Newcastle United home and away now. Via the minus the pandemic, but you've seen a lot of Newcastle United since Steve Bruce has taken over, Kieran. Can you see an identity after all this time? I read a few comments the other day that I think it was maybe on one of the fan podcasts that after all this time they're still not quite sure what Steve is trying to achieve. Is that a bit unfair? Can you see a little bit of a plan and identity that at Newcastle United?
It's there isn't like an overwhelming identity, and I think to be fair with Steve Bruce throughout his career, what would you say Steve Bruce team plays like? So they're hardworking, generally honest. You know, he always tends to play with two people up front, back four. He's not like, when you speak of managers like say Graham Potter or I'm trying to think, Daniel Farke, even who obviously is having his issues, but you look at them, you're like, yeah, I can tell you 6 things about the identity of their sides. Whereas with Newcastle, it has been confusing. I think there are times it's changed definitely from his first season, whereas before, they've sat incredibly deep. I mean, although there've been games this season where they've done that as well. Southampton at home, they started by sitting really deep. Yeah, I don't think you can say hand on heart, this is what you expect to see from Newcastle. It's going the other way now, where they're becoming very, very open, and whereas once they were solid at the back, and you can count on that with Newcastle, you can't count on that anymore, and they're becoming very stretched, and it's probably amazingly entertaining for a neutral, but for a fan or someone who follows the club, you probably are like, but would fans want it like this, or do you want to go back to 2019 where they're riding their luck a lot, they're relying on the keeper, they're having nothing really up front, and they're smashing and grabbing, defenders are scoring all their goals. By now, in my opinion, they should be at a place where there is a very coherent identity, that they're going to play this way, but it does seem every game you're never quite sure what to expect from Newcastle. I think, we go into this weekend's game expecting them to play a back four because it works so well. I think Bruce was very determined to stick with a back five. They played with that every game, competitive or friendly, since April. I think he is trying to get those like building blocks in place where this is what Newcastle are about. But yeah, I don't think we do know, compared to other managers, what exactly we should expect from Steve Bruce's Newcastle. And, it's 2 years into his reign now, and we probably should.
Yeah, I mean, do you think it's a case that he's tried, rightly or wrongly, to cater to what he thinks people want to see rather than maybe what works? At the start, it was, I've not changed it because Rafa Benitez had drilled into the players. Then it was, we'll go a bit more expansive. Oh, it didn't work. I mean, I remember the thrashing against Leicester, I think it was, where he came out and he said something, we tried to go a bit more expansive, and we got, look what's happened. I mean, I'm paraphrasing there, but do you feel we're yet to see Steve Bruce really take it by the scruff of the neck and say, you know what, screw this, I'm going to play the way I want. I don't care what the last manager did. I don't really care what I'm hearing or what I'm being told fans are saying. We're going to do what's best for, the team, and what's best for, for me in a way, because this is what I believe works.
Well, I thought the whole my way thing, we can go into how bonkers that was, but he made a point of saying that the Sheffield United defeat, and then they played Arsenal next, and 4-4-2, Andy Carroll up top with Callum Wilson, and that is, Steve Bruce. He's always played with either one just off the front man or two up top, and you have seen Newcastle do that for a few months now. But when they played with 4-4-2, it was completely torn apart by Arsenal. Not a great Arsenal side, by the way. And I think he's caught between the defenders he has prefer playing deep. Bar Lascelles, there's not much pace there. He's balancing that with, well, we've got two brilliant forwards, game changers who we need to get service to, and it's just been a bit of a mishmash. You're seeing players playing out of position. He's been so wedded to the system that rather than maybe fitting what suits the players, the forward player is the best. He's got the back line in mind all the time. But the problem is the back line are leaking goals left, right, and centre, and the team as a whole aren't defending well enough. I think if you play with a back five, the very least you expect is to be solid. But Newcastle are regularly conceding 2-3 goals, and I think their only clean sheets since February all came against relegated sides, and that probably tells you everything. So will we see an identity before the end of the season? It just feels for me, they'll probably go back to a back four against Watford, but in terms of a medium long-term plan, what is it? Until that stops working, are they going to go back to a back five again? It feels like a cycle, really, as you saw the previous 2 years, that the formation, it'll stick with it if it gets a result, and then there'll come a time where it'll change again. And formation is a big part of your identity.
On to question number 9, sorry. So, has Steve Bruce been treated unfairly by the Newcastle United hierarchy? Now, I was definitely in the camp that he had been hung out to dry a little bit, because, as you mentioned, Kieran, the failure to get in at least one loan signing is just absolutely baffling. We've seen with the injury to Callum Wilson, Newcastle are left. St. Maxim played, really well, I thought, in the central role against Leeds United. But how long is that gonna work for, especially against a team who, and I'm not saying Watford or Wolves are these teams, but you're going to come up against sides who are much more defensively strong than Leeds are. I mean, Leeds were just as open as Newcastle were at the back, so St. Maxim in many ways had that chance to roam without really, much opposition, if you want. But if you come up against a side which is strong at the back, then St. Maxim, I think, is going to struggle in that central role. So you're left without a real goal scoring instinct if Callum Wilson is out. And they should have gone out and got somebody. They should have gone out and got someone on loan at the very least. We've got how many people have we got here? So was Bruce unfairly treated? 48% said yes and 52% said no. So very, very close. What do you make of those results?
Yeah, I think it might be one of the closest results, isn't it, of the whole survey? And it's quite telling. I think there are people who will feel, Steve Bruce went into this job with his eyes wide open. There are plenty of people who had worked under Mike Ashley before or had seen, the regime firsthand, who would have told him all about it. But he felt, I can't resist my boy club. I can be the one, try and to a point. He, as I said before, he's got more out of Mike Ashley than his predecessors. As we said, change of transfer policy with paying in installments. But every manager under Mike Ashley has hit that wall, and he hit it. It probably surprised him how he hit it this summer. To think that you couldn't bring a player in on loan, it just seems ridiculous, really. I know Hamza Chowdhury isn't going to be the difference between Newcastle finishing in the top 10 and not, but it just would have given everyone that little bit of a push, I think, in that squad. He's the kind of player on the training ground who would have really raised things even further. And I think that's why, fans can see that it doesn't seem right that they weren't able to do that. And I think their sympathy probably isn't the word, but I think they're fans who recognize that, other clubs don't operate like this. And he's kind of been left to his own to face the music as well, because I think the biggest thing for me since he's taken charge, he's the one person we hear from every week. So whether it's vaccinations, whether it's the takeover, he's having to answer questions on all these things. And bar that club statement, which we'll get on to, there's no one else at the club coming out and helping him in that way. And you could say he's a big guy, he's 60. He should be well able to handle the pressure being Premier League manager, but he's having all this on top. And that's why I think there are people who feel, he has been a bit unfairly treated, because you add it all up. It's been a bit of a thankless task for him at times, but equally, as I said, he went into it with his eyes wide open, and there were enough people telling him, going back to July 2019, you'd be mad to take this because X, Y, Z, and a lot of those things have come to fruition, really.
On that statement, then, I guess, as you've just mentioned, Steve Bruce is the public figure for Newcastle United. He is the one that gets all the flack. A lot of the issues that he gets flack for are not his his problem. It's not his doing. And then when Newcastle United do come out, it didn't really seem a united statement from those. When you read it, it seemed to maybe it was a bit of a warning shot to say, you knew when we signed Joe Willock, what would happen, that there would be no more money to spend. What did you make of that statement?
Yeah, I mean, it was great to get something that wasn't just about the bloody Premier League, wasn't it? That's what when I first saw the headline of it, and then when you read it, you're like, wow, yeah, this is very much read to me, get back in your box, and it was always telling. I felt the Premier League club had to come out and make a statement like this. Newcastle weren't the only club who only signed one player, but Liverpool got Konate and Man City got Jack Grealish. They didn't have to come out and say, "Oh, this is why we only signed one player," where Newcastle did, and thought that was quite telling. And you read it and you reread it, and they're just, because there was no name put to it, it was always going to get taken apart. And I felt personally it's been quite telling all the times where we really would have needed a club statement for clarity on issues. I go back to even the Bin Zayed group interest around the time when Rafa Benitez had just left, even during the time when there was so much uncertainty about Rafa Benitez. Admittedly, they couldn't say much because it was sensitive, but there have been times where you would have welcomed really proactive communication. And this time it's come, I think, in my opinion, from people at the top feeling that no, it's not right that Steve Bruce has been wrong. They've almost smarted from that, and that's what's led to a statement. And there's certain things in there that got under the skin of fans. The idea, we're better together as a fan base. Almost like taking that support. Like, there's been no one who's stood by Newcastle more than the fans over the years. They're still going across the country. 3,000-4,000 of them every second weekend. You're still getting, for admittedly while people have walked away, you're still getting high attendances at St. James's. They have every right to feel the way they want about the club. They don't need to be told by the club, we got to stick together. They know that themselves, but if they have every right to make their feelings clear when they're not happy about certain things. And as I said, because there wasn't a name put to it, it just felt, and it was the first real sign, I think, of there is tension there between those above and those and Steve Bruce, that the idea that Steve Bruce had somehow been hung out to dry, that from where I sit in, that seemed to annoy those at the top, because they feel he went into this, like, as I said, eyes wide open. You got your number one target, you should be happy, kind of a thing. And of course, he's a manager, he should be pushing for more.
We'll fly through the last few slides, and we asked fans to put in responses to certain questions, so it wasn't multiple choice. It was up to them to pop in their answers to these questions. So this one: if Bruce and Newcastle United part company, who would you realistically want to manage the club? How, as you can see, got the majority of the responses. Again, in very different forms, even though it looks like how has been spelled right every single time. I totted it up, and it was at least 2,000 people out of nearly 6,000 people wanted Eddie Howe. Lampard mentioned, Graham Jones is in there. Frank Lampard mentioned a few times. So I mean, we know that tends to be the name that is touted about, because the last time we did a survey and thousands of you again responded, Eddie Howe was top of that list. And then it would be an interesting choice. Obviously, he took Bournemouth down. He had a lot of money to spend. But do you think, Kieran, and obviously, I mean, the feeling is Steve Bruce is kind of safe until, results really get to a point where Newcastle have to act. And we know Mike Ashley doesn't tend to do that until the last minute. But with Eddie Howe, and he's such a popular choice with Newcastle United fans, is that because people think he can put a bit of an identity into a team? You're watching Eddie Howe's side and you know what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think they'll look at that, and he's still a young manager as well. I think it's quite telling when you look at all the the people put forward, they're all under 50. So Eddie Howe, Frank Lampard, Graham Jones, even, they're all youthfulish characters in terms of, they're what fans would probably view as exciting appointments. What I would say, I think if Newcastle were to make a change, I could see them certainly going for some Premier League experience. Eddie Howe has that, but he's got that relegation to his name. He spent money, as he said. Would he fit what they want? And I still feel there are going to be managers out there who look at this from the outside and think, as big a club as Newcastle is, do I want to work for the regime? And do I want to work when this takeover uncertainty is bubbling in the background? Because in my opinion, the actual situation between when Steve Bruce was appointed 2 years ago and now, it's still so uncertain. Mikel Arteta didn't want the job 2 years ago ultimately because he felt it was far too uncertain for a young manager to go in. I think there will be a lot of managers who will be willing to take that risk, but there'll be some who would be put off by that, and that's the worry. And I think if you look at the people they've previously appointed, it's often been quite left field as well. Just because Eddie Howe's the one that fans would want if they ever did make a change, doesn't necessarily mean they'll listen to that. I think they're not averse to making some really left field, figures from Premier League past who have kind of gone out of your mind, who somehow come back in, and that would be, I nearly have a feeling that there'd be someone like that they'd ultimately go for, whoever that may be. But I think it's not coincidence. You look at, Pardew, McLaren, Joe Kinnear, Steve Bruce, Rafa Benitez aside, it's a similar kind of profile and experience. And I think I'd nearly say that would be the kind of one they'd end up going for. But you can see why the fans would think Howe would be the appointment they need. He's obviously worked with a lot of those players at Bournemouth. But I think the regime might surprise you if they ever did make a change. I personally think they're going to stick with Steve Bruce for a while yet anyway.
If they did make a change, I do fear sort of a Big Sam return. Newcastle are right down in the mix of it, and they need someone to come and save. I do fear that, but of course, it's just my opinion, and I don't think it actually would happen. But yeah, and obviously we pass our best on to Joe Kinnear and his family as well. Yesterday, sadly announced that he's suffering from dementia, which is horrible news. So our best wishes passed on there from everyone at Chronicle Live. On to the final couple then, Kieran. We've got what did you make of the club's statement on the summer transfer business? We've talked about the statement. A lot of people just rubbish, pathetic, rubbish, embarrassing. A few words I'm not going to read out. Poor. Yeah, as we've said, as you've said, the fans have every right to kind of look at that statement and then analyze it and voice their discontent. We then have what are the positives at the club currently? Overwhelmingly none.
Yeah.
Which again is expected, but we'll get down into it. I mean, the fans, we know how great the fans are, as you mentioned, going home and away, supporting them. They did really well against Leeds, backing them against Manchester United. It took until the final 5 minutes until they really started to voice their anger. The fans are always there, they're always brilliant. And Alan St. Maxim as well, who's been the standout performer. He's had a great season.
Yeah.
Kieran, just a word on St. Maxim and how he started his season and how crucial he is to Newcastle.
Yeah, it's been a joy to watch. I think there's so many things that have encouraged me. I think the end product, as I've mentioned before, it's been involved in 66% of their goals this season. I know they haven't scored a ridiculous amount of goals, but that's really good. You see when the chips are down as well, how he's stepping up. So what should have been a winning goal against Southampton right at the death, and then the atmosphere genuinely inside St. James has changed when he equalised against Leeds. You kind of felt, has he done the classic thing where he's taken it too far, he's taken too many touches, and he's a brilliant shot, and he's brilliant. I think what's really encouraged me as well is he's really, really benefited from a full pre-season. He arrived late his first season. The deal was done late in the window, just before the start of the new season. I think he only played one friendly. Then last season, obviously, the pre-season was weird because there was such a small gap between the previous season ending and then the new season starting. But this season, he's actually, I think, 5-6 pre-season games, all that training. he looks really durable, and he's finishing 90 minutes, and he's playing, every game, and that bodes really well because I think it's very rare from what I can remember where he's managed to start 5 games in a row and play 90 minutes in all 5 of those games. So that's a huge bonus. As mentioned, that comment there, they're going to be clubs taking interest. Obviously, with finances changing again, with the pandemic easing in football terms, the fans are coming back, the TV money, etc. There'll be clubs across the continent who will be taking all of these performances. It's one thing, being like Adama Traore, where, you're a ridiculous asset in terms of just taking the team up the pitch. It's another thing when you actually score goals, create goals at this level, and that's going to attract interest. But all I would say about him is the fans have been so important to him. They've made him feel so welcome. He really enjoys playing for Newcastle, and as depressing as it can be at times, he is the main man. The players all look at him a similar way. The fans do. They all applaud him in training when he does ridiculous tricks. They all really rely on him, and I think he relishes that. Whereas if he was just a small part in another side, I'm not so sure he'd be as content, really. So I think that's an aspect to take into account. But equally, he wants to see the club be ambitious, and I think next summer is going to be really interesting, because if Newcastle don't properly strengthen next summer, the danger is you could lose a player like that, and they really need to do all they can to keep him for as long as they can, because I think there's so much more to come from him, and it's really exciting. And as you say, that's been one of the main positives. It is. I think that response to that question was the most sobering for me. That literally someone saying none. Thousands of people just saying none. There are no positives, and to only be a few games in and fans feeling that, it's quite heartbreaking, really. As expected as it is, it just shouldn't be the way.
Yeah, I think Newcastle benefit as well from the fact I think he needs a full season at a consistent level before top 7, top 8 side will come in and splash what will probably be a very expensive transfer fee, considering the contract is under. On to the final slide here then, and it is, what is your message to Steve Bruce? And as you can see, resign, leave, go, resign, go now. You get the general gist of things. He knows he's got to get results because it doesn't look good at the table at the moment. The fans, I think most fans are realistic, as we've seen with what Newcastle can achieve. They're realistic as well. And when it comes to Steve Bruce, when he deserves praise, he'll get it. When he doesn't, he'll get it. I think the majority are respectful in the way they approach that. And yeah, Kieran, we know how a lot of fans are feeling. Just goes back to this weekend, I guess, and he just needs to make sure his team pick up 3 points this weekend and kickstart their season.
Yeah, I think what's lost maybe sometimes is fate's in his own hands. If the team win games, there'll be people who will feel, I don't want Steve Bruce as manager. But if the team is actually playing well and winning games, then those calls won't be as vociferous. And I think that's what he will know himself, that he's got to cocoon the squad and block out the noise, that old cliche, and just realize not everyone's out to get you. This is your dream job. You're in control. You can decide how this goes. And if Newcastle go on a run of wins, they'll certainly get loads of credit from us. He'll certainly get credit from us. It's not like we're going into this with some kind of idea that no matter what he does, he won't get credit. We're literally judging what happens on the field. I think everyone was really worried by that opening 20 minutes against Leeds, but equally they were much better as the game wore on, and that was reflected in the reporting as well. So he is in charge of his own destiny, and it's where he wants to go with it.
Fantastic. Well, Kieran, I appreciate you coming on today. Everything is Black and White Podcast and talking us through the results to the big Bruce survey. Now, the article with a bit of analysis and a more in-depth look into those results will be online at Chronicle Live in the next hour or so. If you're listening to this later in the day or tomorrow, it'll be online right there and now. So I'll put the link into the comments both on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and the podcast description as well. So please remember to like and subscribe and click through to that as well and take a bit of a read And thank you for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of your week.